I was reborn together with Ethan, but he doesn't know that. He thinks I'm still the same person I was in our past life. The one who gave him the best material comforts, sent him to the best university, and supported his startup even at the cost of my family going bankrupt. In the end, he discarded me like trash after using me up. Worse, he stood in front of me, holding hands with my nemesis, Madison, and said, "Finally, I don't have to endure the humiliation of being bought by your money anymore." In this life, I swore I wouldn't give him even a single cent. When it came time to choose a one-on-one sponsorship recipient, Ethan stood before me, arrogant and confident, but I deliberately passed him over and chose the pitiable boy standing next to him instead. Each year, our company participates in an annual charity event, where I represent the organization. As part of our efforts, we select one student from a pool of candidates for direct sponsorship, offering them personalized support. In my previous life, I had picked Ethan out of all the candidates. Unfortunately, he turned out to be nothing more than an ungrateful opportunist. This time, I made sure to notify Madison beforehand. She's not only my mortal enemy but also the so-called true love Ethan kept talking about in our previous life. Ethan had told me more than once that, before I started sponsoring him, Madison had secretly admired him, and it was my wealth that tore them apart. Well, this time, I wanted to see if Madison had ever truly looked at him before he became my boyfriend. When Madison and I arrived at the sponsorship hall, the room was already packed with over 100 students. It didn't take me long to spot Ethan. I had to admit, I still had good taste. Tall, at least 6 feet, with a lean build and pale, flawless skin, Ethan stood out from the crowd of plainly dressed students like a crane among sparrows. Ethan noticed my gaze and immediately straightened his posture, lifting his chin even higher. I knew he had been reborn as well. The former CEO who had once been worth nearly $1 billion was now nothing more than a poor scholarship student again. I wondered if he had adjusted to this humiliating reversal. Facing me, the person he hated most, who now held the power to humiliate him again. How would he react? I walked in, brimming with excitement. The school staff greeted me warmly, repeatedly thanking our company for providing underprivileged students with the opportunity to focus on their studies. Even outsiders knew how to show gratitude, but in our past life, Ethan had turned all of my kindness into a source of resentment, calling it humiliation. This time, I had withdrawn my affection. Let's see if he likes it better this way. I responded with a few modest remarks, saying that this was simply the corporate social responsibility of our company. Then, we moved to the next part of the event. The school staff introduced 10 shortlisted candidates who had been selected based on their grades, awards, and other achievements. My job was to choose one student for direct sponsorship. I sat at the conference table as the candidates formed a line and stepped forward one by one to introduce themselves. Each of them was outstanding, held back only by their lack of financial resources. The purpose of our sponsorship was to provide them with a lifeline, a way to cross the first major river blocking their path. The candidates looked at me with a mix of gratitude and anticipation. Everyone knew that being chosen for one-on-one sponsorship would bring additional resources and the chance for a brighter future. When it was Ethan's turn, his accomplishments were undeniable. He had consistently ranked in the top 10 academically and had won numerous state and national awards. The staff clearly had high hopes for him, even asking him to say a few words to leave a stronger impression. But Ethan didn't cooperate. With a cold expression, he simply said, "Hello," and nothing more. The staff looked visibly uncomfortable, but Ethan remained indifferent, as if he couldn't care less. Ethan looked at me with an air of arrogance and disdain. In our past life, I had chosen him immediately after hearing his introduction, bypassing all the other candidates. He must have thought I'd do the same this time. But I turned to the program coordinator and said calmly, "Let's move on to the next candidate." Ethan froze for a moment, seemingly caught off guard, and didn't leave immediately. The coordinator quickly prompted him, "Ethan, please don't waste time." Ethan cast me a cold glare before turning and walking away. His attitude seemed to say, "If I hadn't caught your attention, you wouldn't even be qualified to stand before me." I didn't even bother acknowledging him and turned my attention back to the next candidate. After listening to the introductions for all the candidates, I made my decision. I chose Sean, A student who had never won any awards but consistently ranked first in his class. He was also the only one with visible injuries. A bruise on his face, reportedly from his alcoholic father. Sean didn't seem to harbor any expectations, but when I announced my choice, his dull eyes lit up briefly, and he simply said, "Thank you." Ethan, on the other hand, was visibly upset. With a sneer, he muttered, "Just a bookworm who only knows how to study." Sean pressed his lips together, staying silent. But I had no intention of letting Ethan's behavior slide. "Are you bullying your peer with your words?" I asked coldly. Ethan looked at me, first in surprise, then with a smug expression, as if he had figured something out. His gaze seemed to say, "So, this is all just a ploy to get my attention." I felt a wave of nausea. Maintaining his aloof demeanor, Ethan replied, "I'm just stating facts. So you don't think there's anything wrong with your behavior?" I countered, not wanting to waste more time on him. I turned to the school staff. "Is this the kind of candidate you selected? I have concerns about his character. The person I choose to sponsor must be someone who can carry forward the kindness they receive. If this student is already condescending and mocking toward his peers, I doubt he will show compassion to others when he has the means to help them." I deliberately framed my criticism as a moral argument, adding weight to my words. In this life, I refuse to waste my kindness on someone as ungrateful as Ethan. My remarks immediately caught the staff's attention. The coordinator stepped in, urging Ethan to apologize to Sean, warning that his sponsorship eligibility could be revoked. Ethan glared at me furiously, but I didn't even look at him. "Didn't you say that the money I spent on you was humiliating? Let's see if you, the mighty Ethan, will swallow your pride for a small sponsorship grant." "I won't apologize," Ethan declared defiantly. "Don't think money can make me bow down. One day, I'll show you all what it means to never underestimate a poor young man." His righteous indignation was almost comical, leaving everyone else speechless. Apparently, not sponsoring him was now equivalent to oppressing him. What an inflated ego. In the awkward silence, a sudden round of applause broke out. It was Madison. She clapped as she walked toward me, her voice laced with mock sincerity. "What a principled young man. Claire, you shouldn't bully someone like that." Her tone was dripping with faux sympathy, painting me as a villain who oppressed poor students. Ethan's eyes lit up the moment he saw her, likely spinning some fantasy about his secret admirer bravely defending him against injustice. But I knew Madison's smirk all too well. It was filled with schadenfreude. She was only doing this to provoke me. I wouldn't fall for it this time. But he refused to apologize first. I said, deliberately looking at Ethan with a dismissive expression. As expected. He lifted his chin and glared at me. I didn't do anything wrong. Feigning helplessness, I sighed dramatically. Our company, Story Corporation, would never sponsor someone who doesn't understand the importance of teamwork among peers. But then, I turned the conversation around. "Since you think so highly of Ethan, Madison, why don't your family sponsor him instead?" As soon as I said that, Ethan's eyes lit up with excitement, and he looked at Madison with anticipation. However, Madison hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, and finally muttered, "I'll have to discuss it with my family." Madison was just a neglected daughter in the powerful Smith family. Expecting her to secure sponsorship was laughable. Still, Ethan wore a smug expression as if saying, "Even if you don't sponsor me, Madison will." I decided to sit back and enjoy the show. I was curious to see how far Ethan would go this time without the financial support of my family. Sean and I were admitted to the prestigious Gold University, while Ethan ended up at the neighboring Normal University. His grades were good enough for Gold University, but Normal University offered subsidies, cheaper tuition, and a monthly stipend. One day, Sean and I bumped into Ethan on campus. He gave us a once-over with a mocking gaze. Sean sneered, showing disdain. The situation reminded me of something similar in our past life. Back then, I liked Ethan and frequently appeared by his side under various excuses. Rumors began to spread that Ethan had latched onto me, the wealthy heiress of the Cooper family, and would never have to worry about his future. I remember accompanying him to the cafeteria once when someone directly called him a kept man. Ethan's face darkened immediately, while the person who said it walked off triumphantly. Ethan turned around and angrily flipped my tray of food, shouting that I should stay away from him. The greasy food spilled all over me as our classmates watched. I can still recall the humiliation of that moment, wishing I could have vanished on the spot. Looking back, I regret not slapping him across the face right then. Now, as I watched Ethan's arrogant behavior, I wanted to call him out for his hypocrisy. Back then, he lashed out when someone insulted him, but now he had no problem ridiculing someone standing in the same position he once occupied. Before I could say anything, Sean stepped forward, locking eyes with Ethan. "You're jealous," Sean said in a calm, matter-of-fact tone, as if he had seen right through him. Ethan instinctively took a step back, trying to maintain his composure. "Why would I be jealous of you?" Sean took another step forward. "You're jealous that I got into Gold University and you didn't. You're jealous that Claire chose me and not you. You're jealous that I'm the one standing by her side. And you're not." Sean's relentless words hit like a series of sharp blows. I almost wanted to applaud him. Ethan was clearly caught off guard and couldn't refute him. After all, he couldn't possibly claim he turned down Gold University in favor of normal university. Finally, he muttered, "I'm not wasting my time on you," and hurriedly left. Sean's sharp demeanor softened as he stepped back to my side. "Doesn't that bother you?" I asked. Sean replied calmly, "I know that's not the truth. At least this time, I had chosen someone emotionally stable, unlike the last person, who turned into a backstabbing ingrate after hearing a couple of rumors. I thought that Ethan's pride would keep him away from me for a long time, but I underestimated his shameless persistence. One day, while I was reading in the library, Ethan approached me. "Claire Cooper, I'm giving you an opportunity to invest in my new energy company. If you invest $50 million, I'll give you 0.1% of the original shares," Ethan declared, leaning over my desk with both hands pressed against the surface. He stared down at me with a mix of arrogance, indifference, and condescension, as though he were doing me a favor. His entire demeanor screamed alpha businessman. But honestly, who pitches an investment like that? I kicked the leg of the table, shoving the chair back as I stood up abruptly. "You're standing too close to me." Ethan stumbled slightly, trying to steady himself. At least the suffocating air of his so-called superiority had dissipated somewhat, though traces of it still lingered. Our commotion interrupted the other students reading nearby, and I was met with disapproving stares. I quickly offered an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry. I just couldn't put up with this harassment from an outsider anymore." "Who are you calling a harasser?" Ethan raised his voice. Immediately, a few tall, burly male students stood up from their seats, looking at him threateningly. Ethan's arrogance vanished in an instant. Misunderstanding, he said quickly, waving his hands. I reassured the students. "It's okay." And only then did they sit back down. Ethan leaned in closer, lowering his voice as he ground out between clenched teeth. "Claire Cooper, don't push it too far." I smirked, unbothered by his empty threats, which only seemed to enrage him further. Still, he forced himself to remain calm and negotiate. "Claire, think carefully. If you don't invest in my company, don't blame me when your family goes bankrupt. Don't say I didn't give you a chance." Ethan looked down at me from his self-appointed pedestal, as if he were some sort of deity looking at a toy in his cabinet. Suddenly, his meaning clicked. He was referencing our past life, when I'd forced my family to drain our entire cash flow to fund his startup. The financial strain almost bankrupted us. But during that time, his core technology achieved a breakthrough that attracted new funding and pulled my family's company back from the brink. It made sense now. His arrogance, the way he acted as though I owed him something. He saw himself as the savior of my family. But without my family's massive cash injection, would our company have ever faced a financial crisis in the first place? Ethan was the type to remember only the outcomes that benefited him, conveniently forgetting the sacrifices others made along the way. Now that I understood his twisted logic, I saw no reason to hold back. "So you want an investment?" I asked, my tone dripping with sarcasm. "Do you have the proper business qualifications? A team? A business plan? A projected earnings report?" Ethan couldn't answer a single one of my questions. I looked at him disdainfully. "You have nothing. And yet you're here asking for my money. What exactly are you offering? Your face. I meant it as a jab. But Ethan's expression suddenly turned to one of indignant shame. Claire Cooper, don't think just because you have a little money, you can do whatever you want. I'll never bow to you. Forget your investment. I'll wait and see how much you regret this. With that, he stormed out of the library, jogging away with a strange mix of anger and flustered embarrassment. It was almost comical, as if he thought I'd insulted him in some unspeakable way. For heaven's sake. All I wanted was to avoid wasting money on him. In the end, Ethan still managed to secure funding. I heard Madison arranged it for him. $500,000 in exchange for 51% of his newly established company. Overnight, Ethan became a campus celebrity. He was enrolled in Normal University's top-tier education program, but none of his courses were remotely relevant to his entrepreneurial pursuits. He never attended class. And when Professor Liu criticized him for neglecting his studies, Ethan shot back. How many years of your salary would it take to match my $500,000 investment? After that, no one dared say a word to him. I knew what his startup was about. He was smart. After all, in our past life, he entered the new energy vehicle industry, focusing on battery longevity. Back then, I had admired him so much, thinking he was brimming with talent. Using my family connections, I got him into Gold University's best program for new energy science and engineering. He dedicated 4 years to his studies there and later co-founded a company with his professor during graduate school. But now, he was just a newly enrolled college freshman. Even with memories of his past life, Ethan had spent so many years as a CEO that he was completely out of touch with the technical side of things. He was confident he could succeed in starting a business relying solely on his technical expertise. I decided to wait and see. Ethan assembled a startup team, searching for the people who had worked with him in our past life. Unfortunately, only a few individuals who were in similar circumstances to his own were swayed by his grand promises and joined him. As for his mentor from our past life, Ethan didn't even get a meeting. Unsurprisingly, why would one of the industry's top technical experts bother with an impoverished student from an unrelated university? I, on the other hand, had no such issues. Using the alumni connection and offering an initial investment of $3 million, I happily struck a deal with Professor Zhang, the very mentor Ethan failed to approach. I even made sure to get Sean into the team under the guise of being a promising student in the same field. With this arrangement, Sean could seamlessly progress from undergraduate to doctoral studies under Zhang's mentorship. A brilliant setup, really. Not long after Sean joined, he began sharing anecdotes about his senior teammates' complaints regarding Ethan. One such tale was particularly amusing. Ethan had demanded that within 3 minutes, his team gather all the competitor information. A senior member quickly pulled up a data analysis website and frantically worked through various filters and searches. However, when the search reached the paywall requiring a membership fee, the senior casually turned the screen toward Ethan. The air of superiority around Ethan, thick enough to rival an 18-story skyscraper, evaporated the moment he saw the membership fee. $30,000. In our past life, $30,000 was pocket change for Ethan, easily covered by my family's resources. Back then, data like this was always available to him at no cost. Now, he was learning just how expensive access to quality information could be. Unsurprisingly, no membership was purchased. An hour later, Ethan handed the team a list of companies and instructed them to investigate their new products. However, after hours of work, the team could barely find relevant information, and one of the companies on the list didn't even exist. When the senior presented the findings, Ethan berated him for half an hour, accusing him of incompetence. These are industry leaders. How could there be so little information about them? Ethan fumed. Eventually, the senior lost his patience, got into a heated argument with Ethan, and quit on the spot. Later, the senior vented to Sean, sarcastically summarizing Ethan's situation. He doesn't have the life of a CEO but carries every symptom of one. I found this evaluation painfully accurate. Ethan had always been conceited. In our past life, his smooth sailing was thanks to my family's Story Corporation constantly propping him up. If he needed data, our strategic department had annual memberships with every major database. If he wanted proposals, a dozen managers, each specializing in their respective areas, worked tirelessly to ensure the plans were ready for him to present. If he demanded technological breakthroughs, the laboratory's engineers worked day and night, filing patents in his name. All these people, piece by piece, created the aura of genius and business acumen that surrounded Ethan, making him seem like a tech prodigy and a rising star in the business world. But Ethan believed it was all his doing, that his brilliance illuminated others. And I, blinded by my infatuation, genuinely thought he was a diamond in the rough. Ethan's startup didn't last long. Just as the team began making some progress, one of the members left, taking the core technology with him. Ethan, of course, claimed it was theft. In reality, the person had filed for a patent under their own name after Ethan insisted on claiming sole credit. The individual then joined a wealthy heir's company, where their salary was 10 times what Ethan could offer. Furious, Ethan stormed into their new company, confronted the employee, and ended up brawling with the heir. Both of them landed in the hospital. It was a spectacle, to say the least. I received word about the incident and immediately informed Madison so we could head to the hospital together. In our past life, that wealthy heir hadn't been willing to let Ethan off so easily. I paid a hefty price to get him out of trouble. But this time, I had no intention of intervening. I was here solely to enjoy the show. Inside the hospital room, Ethan was lying alone on the bed, his leg encased in a plaster cast and suspended high above the bed. On the other side of the room sat the wealthy heir, slouched in a wheelchair with his head wrapped in layers of gauze. Behind him stood several burly bodyguards, their presence making the air in the room heavy with intimidation. Ethan's face had turned pale, clearly terrified. It was a chilling scene. In our past life, when I'd stood alone outside this very room negotiating with those men, I had been scared too. But this time, things were different. I was just here to watch. Ethan's expression relaxed noticeably when he saw me and Madison enter the room. In fact, as his gaze settled on me, he seemed to gain a smug confidence, as though thinking, I knew she wouldn't leave me behind. There was even a trace of dissatisfaction in his eyes, as if asking why I had taken so long to arrive. Watching him, I suddenly had the urge to punch him in the face. Twice. The wealthy heir caught Ethan's gaze and turned to me, smirking. You his girl. I waved both hands frantically, stepping back. Just passing by, I said quickly. Ethan glared at me angrily, but when his eyes shifted to Madison, there was a flash of understanding. It was probably his jealousy kicking in. I took another step back, wanting to stay as far away as possible from the drama. As expected, the heir shifted his attention to Madison. She stepped forward gracefully, and Ethan's gaze softened immediately, filled with what could only be described as infatuation. Don't misunderstand, Madison said softly. I'm just a classmate of his. It seems there's been some sort of misunderstanding between you two. Maybe you can talk it out. She tilted her head slightly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear to reveal her delicate jawline. Misunderstanding? The heir snorted. No misunderstanding here. This punk cracked my skull open, and I'm here for compensation. His eyes lingered on Madison with ill-concealed interest. Madison lowered her head shyly. The heir sneered. What? You gonna pay up for him? Madison hesitated for a moment, maintaining her soft and timid demeanor. Not exactly. I was just hoping you might consider going easy on him. For my sake. The heir rubbed his chin, pretending to think. Fine. I was supposed to close $1 billion deal today, but thanks to him smashing my head, that's gone. I was gonna make him pay for it all. But for you, I'll be generous. Let's say he owes me $90 million instead. That's a 10% discount. What a deal. Huh. The heir's outrageous demand made Madison's expression shift instantly. The timid facade vanished without a trace. I'm not that close to him. Whatever the issue is, you should discuss it directly with him, she said curtly before turning and leaving the room without even glancing at Ethan. The light in Ethan's eyes visibly dimmed, with no one stepping in to help. The heir turned his menacing gaze back to Ethan. If I don't get what I want, I'll make sure you end up in prison. It was just like in our past life. Both parties were injured, but Ethan had thrown the first punch. If the heir refused to settle, Ethan would inevitably face criminal charges. Ethan knew this. Of course, back then, I'd secretly used Story Corporation's most lucrative business division to broker a deal with the heir. Not only had I managed to keep Ethan out of trouble, but I'd also retrieved the core technology that had been taken from him. But this time, Ethan had no money, no power, and no connections. Yet he'd recklessly marched into someone else's company to pick a fight, likely assuming I would clean up his mess again. Sure enough, Ethan turned to me with pleading eyes. "Claire Cooper, as long as you help me resolve this, I'll be your boyfriend," Ethan blurted out, squeezing his eyes shut and turning his head away, as if he'd just suffered the greatest humiliation of his life. In our past life, I had spared him the truth about the price I'd paid to protect him, worried that his injuries and the pressure would be too much. But this time, I wanted him to see with his own eyes exactly what he had lost. Feigning a look of hesitation and concern, I turned to the heir, adopting an overly dramatic, soap opera tone. "What will it take for you to let him go?" The heirs group immediately recognized me. Instead of lowering their demands, they raised them. Well, isn't this the heiress of Story Corporation herself? "Forgive me for not recognizing you earlier," the heir said with mock humility. "We're all family here, so let's not waste time talking about money. If you want me to let this little toy boy of yours go, it's simple. Hand over Story Corporation's retail channels." He smiled at me, all fake politeness and calculated malice. Ethan's eyes flew open, and his head snapped toward me in shock. Of course, he understood the value of Story Corporation's retail channels. He'd taken over the company in our past life. He knew what I had sacrificed back then to protect him. I pretended to hesitate. My expression conflicted, and Ethan's face softened, his emotions betraying a mixture of gratitude and guilt. He must have recalled how Story Corporation's channels had once been exploited to save him, all for his sake. But then I smiled mischievously, breaking the illusion. If he were truly mine, sure, I'd pay for him, but some people don't know their place. If they've already been dirted by others, I'm not in the habit of recycling garbage. I rolled my eyes at Ethan with exaggerated disdain, then turned and strode out of the hospital room, leaving him to stew in his humiliation. The feeling of relief was almost exhilarating. Ethan wasn't thrown in jail, but only because the heir didn't actually want money. He wanted Ethan's project. In the end, Ethan had no choice but to hand over his entire startup team, and even signed a contract to work for the heir. Until graduation, he was nothing more than an intern, earning a meager $1,000 monthly stipend. When Madison found out, she immediately confronted Ethan. It turned out the $500,000 she'd invested in him had come from one of her wealthy ex-boyfriends. Not only had Ethan failed to generate any returns, but the original investment was completely gone. Furious, the ex accused Madison of colluding with Ethan to scam him and broke up with her on the spot. Madison, unwilling to let the matter go, hounded Ethan relentlessly. Rumor had it that after several rounds of heated arguments, Ethan caved and signed a $500,000 AU to her. At his current stipend, it would take him several lifetimes to pay it back. I mocked Madison's naivety in my heart, but my laughter didn't last long. Ethan, ever shameless, soon turned his attention back to me. One morning, as I stepped out of my dormitory to head to class, I spotted him waiting at the entrance. He held a small, transparent plastic bag with 2 cafeteria-bought steamed buns inside. "Claire," he called out, jogging toward me with a wide smile. "I brought you your favorite steamed buns." He handed me the bag, striking what he likely thought was a charming pose, flipping his hair dramatically. I was so disgusted I nearly threw up my breakfast from the day before. Ethan noticed my expression of revulsion, and his thick eyebrows knitted together in irritation. "Don't like them? Didn't you used to say?" He stopped mid-sentence, realizing he was about to slip up. His awkwardness only deepened my amusement. I smirked coldly, remembering vividly what he was referring to. In our past life, after the cafeteria incident where he'd humiliated me in front of everyone, I'd stubbornly avoided him for a week. During that time, he'd been targeted by classmates and couldn't take the pressure anymore. Eventually, he brought me breakfast as an apology. "Too cold. Hard-steamed buns. Thinking back now, I wouldn't be surprised if those buns were leftovers from his own meal the day before. But back then, in my love-addled state, I'd been over the moon. Ethan actually bought me breakfast. He personally bought it just for me. How foolish I had been. I forced myself to eat those 2 dry steamed buns, even though it made my stomach ache for 3 days afterward. Despite that, I still happily followed Ethan around like a love-struck fool. Looking back, I wished I could travel through time and slap myself. Twice. I didn't even like steamed buns. Neither did Ethan. Neither do I. Startled, I turned to see Sean standing behind me, holding a pink insulated lunchbox in both hands. Resting on top of it was a glass bottle of fresh milk. "I told you, you don't need to buy me breakfast every day," I said awkwardly, feeling a bit guilty. "Skipping breakfast is bad for your stomach," Sean replied, handing me the milk. Once, he had accidentally witnessed me clutching my stomach in pain, and heard me casually mention that it was probably because I'd skipped breakfast. Ever since then, he had taken it upon himself to prepare me breakfast every single day, no matter the weather. Without fail, I took the milk from him. It was the perfect temperature and tasted surprisingly good. Ethan, realizing no one was paying attention to him, snorted in frustration and stormed off. As he passed the trash can, he deliberately hurled the buns into it with a loud thud, the bag hitting the side before falling to the ground. Without looking back, he walked away. "So uncivilized," I muttered, shaking my head. "Wasting food is just wrong." Sean handed me the lunchbox and walked over to pick up the buns. He removed the plastic bag and placed the food by a spot where students often left scraps for the stray cats. In that moment, he seemed to glow, his kindness shining effortlessly. Ethan wasn't ready to give up, though. He kept finding ways to appear in my life, as persistent as a fly that just wouldn't go away. If I was heading to class, he would arrive early to save a seat, waving at me from afar. I filed a complaint with the professor, saying his behavior was distracting me from learning. If I went to the cafeteria, he'd wait in line and insist I cut in front of him. I'd turn around and head to a different floor for a quiet meal. If I went home for the weekend, he'd wait downstairs, claiming he wanted to walk with me. I handed my bag to my assistant and hopped into the luxury car waiting to pick me up, leaving him behind. I was thoroughly annoyed. Sean noticed and started spending even more time with me. His schedule was already packed with classes and research projects for Professor Zhang's team, leaving him little time to rest. Yet, when he was with me, he never seemed rushed or impatient. In the evenings, after Sean finished his work, we'd feed the stray cats together outside the dorm. The kittens, cautious yet greedy, would cautiously approach the food. I'd break pieces of cod-flavored cat treats into small bits and hold them out on my palm. Their soft, wet little tongues would lap at my hand, sending a gentle, ticklish sensation up my arm and melting my heart. I found myself jealous of a cat. Sean's quiet voice broke the moment. It was so soft I almost didn't hear him. I turned my head and found his bright, damp eyes staring at me. It was only then that I realized how close we were, our arms brushing against each other through the thin fabric of our sleeves. I could feel his body heat. A faint breeze carried a subtle scent of grass and greenery. It wasn't from the trees. It was Sean's scent. I tilted my head slightly, feeling a bit dazed by the moment. "What are you doing?" The sudden, angry shout shattered the peace. We turned to see Ethan standing behind us, his face contorted with fury. The kittens, startled by his voice, scattered in all directions. Ethan's intense gaze locked onto me, as if I were the sole focus of his wrath. He looked as though he was 1 second away from charging at me and tearing me to pieces. Sean stood up and stepped in front of me, shielding me from Ethan's fury. I dropped the small bit of cod treat left in my hand, brushed off my palms, and walked out from behind Sean. "What right do you think you have to question me?" I said coldly, my expression unyielding. Ethan's anger faltered. His voice rasped as he stammered. I'm. He looked like a caged animal, his emotions spiraling from rage to confusion, then to regret, and finally settling on a flicker of pain. "You're mine," he whispered, his gaze fixated on me as though I were the most precious thing in the world. But I didn't believe it. Not anymore. And even if it were true, it was far too late. I suppressed the stir of emotions in my chest and turned to Sean. Let's head back. Sean nodded. I'll walk you upstairs first, he said gently. I ascended the stairs without a backward glance, ignoring Ethan's calls. His voice echoed behind me, but my steps didn't falter. I didn't turn. Ethan was like a pit of quicksand. In our past life, stepping into it had left me covered in mud, dragging my family down with me. This time, I was determined to steer clear of him entirely. Ethan didn't pester me again after that day, but Sean's routine didn't change. Breakfast together in the mornings, evening strolls, and feeding the stray cats had become a steady rhythm in my life. That is, until one day when Sean was absent from morning to night. A faint sense of unease began to creep in. I asked his senior classmates, but they hadn't seen him in the lab. He hadn't even responded to requests for project data. Unable to shake the feeling, I used my family's connections to investigate. It turned out that Sean had left campus late the previous night and hadn't returned. His last known location was a dingy alley near his family home. I immediately thought of his alcoholic father and the bruises I'd seen on Sean's face the first time we met. My chest tightened with dread as I gathered people and rushed to the address. The house was small and dilapidated, its walls blackened from years of neglect. A burly man reeking of alcohol leaned against the wall, a bottle dangling from his hand. When we entered, he lazily raised his hand to shield his eyes from the light before taking another swig. Where's Sean? I demanded. The man ignored me, swaying slightly as he drank. One of my men grabbed him by the shoulders and gave him a rough shake. He burped and slurred. Taken away. That little brat thought he could run and hide from me? Someone came looking for him. Said he'd take care of my debts. The drunkard staggered, the bottle slipping from his grip as he laughed bitterly. His words made something click in my mind, but the thought slipped away before I could grasp it. Frustrated, one of my men slapped him hard across the face. Twice. He finally cowered, clutching his head, and muttered a name, Biao. We didn't waste a second. Gathering my people, we headed straight to find Biao. When we arrived, Biao agreed to let me in, but only if I came alone. Without hesitation, I accepted. Inside a dim, empty room, Sean sat in the middle, bound to a chair. His head was pressed against a table, his face hovering above an IOU. Blood spattered his face and clothes, but his teeth were clenched, his silence defiant. Kid's got guts, Biao said with a smirk, motioning for his men to release Sean. Sean lifted his head slowly, only to see me standing there. For a brief moment, his eyes flickered with a mix of relief and rage. What are you doing here? Sean struggled to stand, but one of Biao's men slammed him back down into the chair. Easy there, kid. The man sneered. With someone like her on your side, maybe your dad's gambling debt can be wiped clean. Wouldn't that be a nice, tidy ending for you too? Biao walked over, picked up the IOU, and spread it out in front of me. Mississippi, judging by your appearance, I'd say you're not short on cash. Pay off the boy's debt, and I'll personally see you both out. How about that? I glanced at the figure written on the note. A little over $120,000. Without hesitation, I nodded. Deal. Sean's eyes darkened momentarily before he began to struggle violently. Give me the IOU. I'll sign it. I'll pay it. Just don't involve her. His voice wavered, almost breaking, and it tugged at my heart. All I wanted was to settle the matter quickly and get him out of here. But before I could proceed, one of Biao's men leaned in and whispered something to him. Biao's expression immediately shifted as recognition dawned on his face. The Cooper family heiress? He chuckled darkly, feigning politeness. Forgive me. I didn't realize. Asking for a mere 100,000. What an insult to your status. He snapped his fingers, and a fresh IOU was handed over. This one listed a debt of 10 million, with an interest rate of 1% per day. Biao pointed to the bottom of the page. Sign here, Miss Cooper, and we'll consider the matter closed. This was extortion, plain and simple. My lips tightened as I said nothing, sensing the men around me closing in. My bodyguards were on high alert, their tense postures ready for anything. The standoff grew heavier by the second, and then the door burst open. Police officers stormed in. Before entering the building, I'd made sure to file a report. and their swift response didn't disappoint me. The sight of the police clearly rattled Biao's gang. In their panic, one of them drew a gun, aiming it directly at me. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the room, and for a split second, my mind went blank. Warm droplets of blood splattered onto my hands, snapping me back to reality. I realized I was being held tightly in a warm embrace. Sean's. He had shielded me. Biao and his men were arrested, and Sean was rushed to the hospital. During the investigation, it was revealed that Ethan had contacted Sean late that night, supposedly to pass along a message from Sean's father. Ethan insisted he had no involvement in what happened next, leaving the authorities without enough evidence to charge him. After giving his statement, Ethan walked out of the police station, free as ever. But Sean and I both knew he wasn't innocent. While Sean was recovering in the hospital, Ethan had the audacity to visit. Sean was lying back on the bed, his shoulder bandaged, while I sat beside him, carefully feeding him spoonfuls of bird's nest soup. First, Sean was a little shy about it, but when Ethan entered the room, Sean deliberately accepted the spoon with a slow, deliberate bite, making eye contact with me as if to say, "More, please." His playful antics made me laugh, and I couldn't help but oblige. Ethan, standing at the door, glared at us with a dark, twisted expression. His face contorted with barely suppressed anger. "Claire Cooper," he spat. "What does he have that I don't? He's just the son of a drunk gambler. Does he really deserve this? Or is it that you enjoy the thrill of toying with poor boys like him?" His words were unhinged, his tone laced with bitterness. He wasn't even trying to hide the fact that he, too, had been reborn. His accusation made me want to laugh. Toying with them? In our past life, I had thrown everything, my family, my company, into supporting him, only for him to turn around and call it manipulation. I couldn't even muster the energy to argue anymore. "Ethan, you're not welcome here. Please leave," I said coldly, cutting him off. But Ethan didn't leave as he would have in the past. Instead, he walked over to me, crouching down beside my chair, and reached for my hand, his desperation palpable. I avoided Ethan's hand, and he looked frustrated. Still, he tried to control his temper. "Claire, stop playing games with me. Let's go back to the way things were. Stay by my side, and I promise I'll never treat you badly again. Okay?" His tone carried a hint of pleading, his expression softening. I gave him a deliberate smile. Just as the light of hope began to return to his eyes, I gently said, "No." It was the same word he'd thrown at me in our past life. When I'd begged him to spare Story Corporation, to spare my parents, he had stood there, holding Madison's hand, stepping on mine as he said coldly, "No." Sean recovered quickly. On the day the doctor approved his discharge, he immediately returned to the lab. Meanwhile, my parents, shaken by the events with Biao, required my attention at home. My days became a routine of shuttling between school and family. Life was peaceful for a while, until I noticed my father looking troubled. When I asked, he admitted that the family business was under attack. Long-standing clients were suddenly poached, bids were being undercut, and even our retail channels, previously untouchable, were being interfered with. The one orchestrating all of this? None other than the heir who had fought with Ethan. Their tactics weren't enough to cripple Story Corporation, but they were an annoyance. My father, unwilling to deal with these minor issues, handed them over to me. I knew immediately that Ethan, armed with memories from our past life, was pulling the strings. Unfortunately, proving his involvement would be nearly impossible. That left me with only one option: targeting the new energy project. Since Ethan's team had been absorbed by the heir's company, progress on the project had stalled. Frustrated by constant setbacks, Ethan had turned his attention to Professor Zhang, trying to get his foot in the door. What he didn't know was that Professor Zhang often shared these attempts with me, treating them as a source of amusement. When that route failed, Ethan began approaching Sean's senior classmates. Sean mentioned that someone seemed tempted but hadn't made a move yet. Originally, I planned to have Professor Zhang reassign the wavering classmate, but instead, I told Sean to keep an eye on him and avoid scaring him off. The new energy project progressed rapidly. Professor Zhang and his students filed for a joint patent as co-researchers. and as soon as it was approved, Ethan sued both the professor and Story Corporation. His accusation? That we had stolen their technology. His key witness? The classmate he had successfully bribed. Ethan didn't stop there. He spread the story online, attempting to use public opinion to damage Story Corporation's reputation. "Claire Cooper," he said smugly before the trial, "as long as you come back to me, I'll withdraw the lawsuit." I couldn't help but laugh. In our past life, I had given him my heart, my loyalty, and my everything, only for him to discard me like trash. In this life, despite my constant efforts to suppress him, he kept crawling back. "In your dreams," I said coldly, brushing past him without a second glance. At the trial, Ethan strutted in confidently, presenting various data comparisons to prove that his team had developed the technology first. Our side, however, presented only two pieces of evidence. The first was video footage showing the bribed classmates secretly copying lab data and handing it over to Ethan. The second was a direct comparison of the core data itself, revealing that the classmate had stolen falsified data. The differences between the stolen data and the real results exposed Ethan's baseless claims of plagiarism. The verdict was unsurprising. Our lawyers immediately filed a countersuit against Ethan for intellectual theft, wrongful accusations, and defamation through the dissemination of false information online. While the court couldn't issue a ruling on the spot, the evidence was overwhelming. Ethan had no way out. Before the final judgment, Ethan requested to meet me one last time. I agreed, and Sean came along, staying nearby while I met with Ethan. As Sean walked a short distance away, Ethan watched him leave, a bitter smile on his face. "I can't believe you still have feelings for that poor kid." I knew Ethan had figured out that I, too, had been reborn. But ingratitude and betrayal aren't problems of poverty. They're problems of character. I no longer felt the need to hide it. "You've been reborn, haven't you?" Ethan said, his eyes burning with intensity. "You're just like me. We're the same." I couldn't help but marvel at his audacity. How thick-skinned must he be to think I'd ever have a change of heart toward him? "Ethan," I said, calling him by name for the first time in a long while. He turned toward me with a glimmer of hope in his eyes, as though expecting something significant. I smiled. "Do you remember the $500,000 you still owe to Madison?" His face turned ashen. I didn't bother sparing him any further pleasantries. "Ethan, seeing you like this actually makes me happy," I said, my voice calm but cutting. "In our past life, I liked you. That made you think you were somehow superior to me. You're 6 feet tall, lean, pale-skinned. So what? Not only were you ungrateful, but you despised the very ladder that lifted you up, calling it filthy. If you hated it so much, why didn't you just tell me?" I took a step closer, my voice steady and unyielding. "You took everything I gave you, my love, my resources, my support, and still wished you could stomp me into the ground. But let me tell you this, in this life, I owe you nothing. All I've done is reclaim what was mine to begin with. Look around," I said with a faint smile. "This is the place you were always meant to be." Ethan's face crumbled. He staggered backward, his once proud posture collapsing entirely. Without the countless sacrifices I'd made for him in our previous life, he could no longer maintain the arrogance that had been so carefully nurtured by my love and wealth. Sean arrived to pick me up, paying no attention to Ethan. His gaze was soft and focused entirely on me. "I'm just a poor guy," Sean murmured, lowering his lashes, a hint of dejection in his tone. I was about to comfort him when he suddenly lifted his head, a broad grin lighting up his face. "But I won't always be." He held up his phone, the screen displaying a new text message. "Your new patent application has been approved." Sean's smile was infectious, and I couldn't help but mirror it. For the first time in a long while, I felt a deep, unshakable sense of contentment. The first story has concluded. We invite you to listen to the second story, Rebirth in 1978. I decided to do 3 things. First, I would take the initiative to apply for a transfer to support the construction of the Northwestern region. Second, I would no longer foolishly serve my husband, Ethan Grant, or cater to his pregnant foster sister, Maya Moore. Third, I would divorce Ethan Grant, part ways completely, and never see him again. When I stopped making a fuss and no longer cared about how he stood by Maya, Ethan assumed that being locked in confinement had tamed me. However, when he got injured during a mission and needed someone to take care of him, I mercilessly refused. It was only then that he realized that things had spiraled completely out of his control. I had decided I didn't want him anymore. Emma Grant, your confinement is over. You can come out now. The cold voice of Ethan's personal guard jolted me from my daze. I limped out of the confinement room. The piercing sunlight made it impossible to open my eyes fully, and tears streamed down involuntarily. The guard's emotionless voice continued. The commander has a meeting today. He asked me to deliver a message. Go home, reflect on your mistakes, and write an apology letter. He will review it when he returns after the meeting. I wiped the tears from the corners of my eyes, said nothing, and walked forward. Ethan's bodyguard trailed behind me, his disdain evident in the way he looked at me. As the wife of a commander who had failed to gain her husband's favor, I was used to being looked down upon. In my previous life, I had clung desperately to things that weren't mine. I gave everything I had, only to be locked in confinement, scolded impatiently by Ethan, hated and neglected. In the end, I succumbed to depression and took my own life. When I married Ethan, there were moments of genuine love. He bought me snacks, took me to the movies, and strolled with me hand in hand. We were the envy of everyone around us. But everything changed when Maya appeared, heavily pregnant, seeking refuge with Ethan. From the day Maya arrived, I became invisible to Ethan. She was the only one he saw, the only one he cared about. He accompanied her to pick out baby supplies, went with her to prenatal checkups, and gave her all the money we had saved up. First, I thought Ethan only saw Maya as a sister. I even helped take care of her, thinking it was my duty. But one day, I stumbled upon Maya's diary. Dear Ethan, I love you. I know you love me too. Why can't we be together? I feel like I'm going to explode if I can't tell the world how much I love you. Without you, I can't live. The words felt like a bolt of lightning. I confronted Maya, demanding an explanation. She wasn't the least bit afraid. It's just as you saw, she said casually. We love each other. The only reason we're not together is because of certain circumstances. Furious, I slapped her across the face. She ran crying to Ethan, claiming I had hurt her. Ethan pushed me roughly to the ground, twisting my ankle, and rushed Maya to the hospital when she started showing signs of distress. Ethan didn't come home for several days, staying by Maya's side in the hospital. When I worked up the courage to visit, Maya, clutching her pregnant belly, smirked at me. I love Ethan, and he loves me. The only reason he married you was because of societal pressure. Let's be honest. You're nothing but a cover for us. I had never seen such shamelessness. Overwhelmed with anger and disbelief, I demanded Ethan choose between us. He dismissed me as unreasonable, rubbing his temples in frustration. You're making baseless accusations, he said. You're petty and small-minded. I'm just helping a pregnant, homeless foster sister. Why must you twist it into something else and throw dirt on me and Maya? Later, Maya falsely accused me of trying to harm her unborn child. Ethan, once again, refused to believe me and stood by her side. He forced me to apologize to her. I refused because I had done nothing wrong. Enraged, Ethan ordered his guards to lock me in confinement so I could reflect on my mistakes. In my previous life, I spent a week in that confinement room. When I was released, Ethan instructed his guard to tell me to write an apology letter. I refused, convinced I was being stubborn. Ethan decided to divorce me. I loved Ethan deeply and couldn't bear to lose him. So, under his relentless pressure, I humiliated myself by writing an apology letter and bowing down to Maya. I thought taking a step back would give me peace. But I was too naive. After Maya Moore gave birth to her child, she continued to live in my and Ethan Grant's home. I worked during the day and then cared for her like a servant during her postpartum recovery. No matter how much I did for her, Maya was never grateful. Instead, she constantly found ways to slander and provoke me. Every time, Ethan chose to side against me, looking at me as if I were something unreasonable and despicable. The prolonged mental torment took its toll. I became ill, crippled with depression, constantly second-guessing everything. But I didn't realize how sick I was. And Ethan didn't care. I struggled alone, trapped in endless misery, often contemplating ending it all just to escape. Then I got pregnant. For the first time in ages, I felt a glimmer of joy and hope. I carefully nurtured the life growing inside me, convinced that the baby would rekindle the love Ethan and I once shared. But it was just my foolish dream. When Maya found out I was pregnant, she devised a plan to ruin me completely. In the end, I couldn't protect my baby. I lost my child. And as I lay in my hospital bed, shattered and broken, Ethan was by Maya's side, comforting her and her child. Dragging my battered body past Maya's room, I saw Ethan peeling an apple for her. He cradled her child in his arms, speaking gently, their laughter filling the room. They looked like a perfect, loving family. The sight drove me to madness. I climbed to the hospital rooftop and threw myself off, ending my miserable, pitiful life. Now, in this second chance, I slowly walked home with my memories of that life weighing heavily on me. On the way, I encountered several familiar faces. People stopped to stare at me, their gazes filled with ridicule and disdain. Thanks to Maya, the entire neighborhood now saw me as a malicious woman who couldn't tolerate her husband's sister, even stooping so low as to harm a pregnant woman. In my past life, those judgmental stares filled me with unbearable shame. But in this life, having already died once, I no longer cared. I swore to myself that I would never follow the same path again. I wouldn't apologize to Maya, no matter what. If Ethan wanted a divorce, I would give it to him. I would rid myself of those two revolting people forever. Pushing open the gate and stepping into the courtyard, I heard footsteps. Maya, with her pregnant belly, opened the door and walked out. Her eyes immediately filled with disdain when she saw my disheveled appearance. Covering her nose dramatically, she sneered. "Oh, you're back. Being locked up wasn't fun, was it?" Seeing her again ignited a fire of hatred within me. I kept my composure and said coldly, "Get out of my way." Maya smirked, her tone mocking. "You're still so arrogant after 7 days in confinement? Looks like you didn't reflect at all. Let me tell you, Ethan said you would give me a sincere apology. I'm looking forward to it." Without anyone else around, Maya didn't bother hiding her malice. I stopped in my tracks, looked her in the eye, and replied slowly, "Then you'd better keep waiting for that apology." 7 days without bathing had left me filthy and reeking. Ignoring Maya, I went inside, boiled water, took a bath, and changed into clean clothes. I opened my box and grabbed all the money, food stamps, meat coupons, and cloth tickets I had saved. When I walked back outside, Maya was lounging in the courtyard under the sun. She barked at me like a tyrant. "I'm hungry. Go buy groceries and cook dinner. Get plenty of meat and ribs while you're at it." I didn't respond. Without even glancing at her, I stepped out of the gate, got on my bicycle, and headed straight to my workplace. At my desk, I quickly wrote an application letter, then knocked on my supervisor's door. When he read it, his eyes widened in shock. "You want to apply to join the Northwest Construction Support Program? This isn't a joke. The environment there is terrible, and it's a minimum 5-year commitment. Are you sure Ethan Grant would be okay with this?" "This is my decision," I said firmly. "Ethan has no right to interfere. Besides, when it comes to serving the nation, personal matters don't come first. I've made up my mind. I want to dedicate my life to my country." Seeing my determination, my supervisor accepted my application but kindly advised me to discuss it with Ethan before finalizing my decision. If I was certain, I would need to prepare to leave in 2 weeks. Walking out of the office, I let out a long breath. My stomach growled from hunger. As I passed a small restaurant, I paused. After entering the restaurant, I exchanged my food and meat coupons for a delicious meal. Feeling satisfied, I strolled along the street, thinking about my next steps. Submitting my application to join the Northwest Construction Support Program was the first clear-headed decision I had made since my rebirth. From now on, I wouldn't foolishly cling to Ethan Grant as I had in my past life, nor would I swallow my pride to care for the vile and shameless Maya Moore. With the application submitted, my next step was to divorce Ethan. In my past life, he had threatened me with divorce just to force me to apologize to Maya. This time, I expected things to unfold the same way, but I would go along with it willingly. ending everything between us once and for all. I took my time returning home, not stepping through the door until the sun was setting. As soon as I walked in, I heard Maya's tearful sobbing. "Sister-in-law must hate me to death," she wailed. "She told me to leave as soon as she came back. Ethan, just let me go. I don't want to cause a rift between you and her." Maya cried as if she were packing to leave, but Ethan hurriedly stopped her, his hand reaching out to hold her back. She leaned into his arms without hesitation. Disgusted by the scene before me, I slammed the door shut with force. Both of them flinched, turning their heads toward me. Ethan pushed Maya away from his embrace, his face darkening. "Where have you been?" he snapped. "Why didn't you make dinner?" "Ethan, don't be harsh with her," Maya interjected in her usual sweet, manipulative tone. "Sister-in-law must be upset. It's understandable she didn't make dinner. I don't mind going hungry." Ethan's face grew even grimmer at her words. "Fine. Then get to the kitchen and make dinner now. I already bought the groceries." Maya said she wanted braised pork and spare ribs. Make plenty to nourish her. I wanted to refuse, but when I saw the ribs and pork he had brought, I changed my mind and headed to the kitchen. Seeing me comply, Maya's eyes briefly flickered with dissatisfaction. In less than an hour, I served the braised pork and spare ribs on the table and even thoughtfully portioned the rice for them. Both of them were starving and quickly sat down. Ethan, ever the doting man, placed 2 large pieces of ribs and a slice of braised pork into Maya's bowl. "Eat up. Don't let the baby go hungry," he said gently. I stood there like a ghost, completely ignored. There was no invitation for me to join the meal, not even a glance in my direction. I couldn't help but curl my lips in a cold smile. How utterly foolish I had been in my past life, accepting this kind of treatment yet still hopelessly devoted to Ethan. What a waste of my life. I watched Maya take a huge bite of the pork with a look of satisfaction on her face. But as soon as the meat entered her mouth, she froze. Before she could chew, she spat it out violently. "It's so salty," she cried. I had used an entire bag of salt when preparing the braised pork and spare rib soup. It wasn't enough to kill them, but it was more than enough to make them miserable. Maya, panicking, grabbed a spoonful of soup to wash away the taste, only to realize the soup was just as salty. Her face twisted in discomfort as she let out a few choked sounds before rushing into the kitchen for water. Across the table, Ethan dipped his chopsticks into the soup and tasted it. His expression immediately darkened. "Emma, you're impossible," he barked. I shrugged innocently. "What did I do? I worked hard to cook for you too. And now you're complaining? If you're not satisfied, then do it yourselves next time." With that, I turned and went upstairs, leaving them to deal with the chaos. Downstairs, I could hear Maya crying and Ethan soothing her. The racket continued for quite some time. In my past life, hearing these words would have devastated me, piercing my heart and leaving me utterly broken. But now, I paid no attention. Half an hour later, after calming Maya more down, Ethan Grant stormed into my room, his face dark with anger. "Emma, go and apologize to Maya right now," he commanded. "What if I don't?" I replied, meeting his gaze head-on. "If you don't apologize, we'll get divorced. I mean it." "Fine. Let's get divorced." I smiled, nodding. "We can file the papers right now." My calm agreement left Ethan staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. I gave him a fleeting glance before looking away, grabbing the divorce papers I had prepared long ago. I had already signed them and handed them to him. "Here are the papers. I've already signed them. Now it's your turn." Ethan snatched the papers from my hand, his expression dark. He skimmed through the document at lightning speed, then let out a cold laugh. "Emma, let me warn you. If I sign this, the consequences won't be something you can handle. Don't play these reverse psychology games with me." "What consequences? Just a divorce. Life goes on for both of us. If you're a man, Ethan, sign it without hesitation." A vein on Ethan's forehead throbbed. He didn't sign but glared at me with fierce intensity. "Emma, don't regret this." "I'll never regret it," I said firmly, handing him the pen. Ethan seemed caught between a rock and a hard place. He pressed his lips together but didn't pick up the pen. I looked at him with a smirk, my expression dripping with mockery. Don't tell me Ethan Grant can't bear to divorce me? His face contorted with frustration, his temper about to explode. He grabbed my wrist and dragged me closer to him. Emma, my patience is running thin. Apologize now, and I'll let everything slide. Otherwise what? I cut him off, my tone mocking. You'll put me in confinement again? What reason will you use this time? Because I put too much salt in the food? That's hardly enough to justify locking me up. Don't you think? Ethan's grip tightened, his entire body trembling with anger. He had never seen me so defiant before, and it was clear he didn't know how to handle this version of me. But the truth was, I hadn't done anything wrong, and he had no legitimate reason to punish me. You made a mistake and refused to admit it. You even act like you're in the right. He growled. How many times do I have to tell you? Ethan, I said coldly. I, Emma Grant, have a clear conscience. I never laid a hand on Maya. Then why did she fall? If it wasn't you, who else could it have been? I had known all along that Ethan wouldn't believe me, so why waste my breath explaining? I yanked my hand out of his grip. No need to keep talking. Just sign the papers. Ethan gritted his teeth, stepping closer with a menacing glare. Enough. Emma, do you really think I don't have the guts to sign? I don't think that. I said calmly. I'm just tired of this life. Let's set each other free. My unwavering expression and firm tone made Ethan's eyes flash with hurt. I didn't flinch, staring at him coldly. The man I had loved so deeply in my past life. The one I had sacrificed everything for. But now, there was no love, no longing left in my gaze. Only disgust. Ethan opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. Before Ethan could respond, a sharp scream from outside pierced the air. It was Maya Moore. Ethan slammed the divorce papers against me and stormed out. I got up and followed him, only to see Maya clutching her stomach in apparent pain, leaning against Ethan for support. Ethan, my stomach hurts, she whimpered. This was her usual act, her foolproof tactic. Ethan, ever concerned about her, immediately leaned in to steady her, asking question after question. Then he turned to me, barking, "What are you standing there for? Come help." What does this have to do with me? I replied coldly. I held out the unsigned divorce papers. Sign these first. Ethan looked at me in disbelief, his expression a mixture of shock and anger. He shoved my hand aside, picked up Maya, and rushed out the door without another word. I followed him to the doorway and caught a glimpse of Maya's face, disappointment flickering in her eyes. It wasn't hard to guess why. If she had known Ethan and I were discussing divorce, she probably wouldn't have feigned illness to drag him away. But she had miscalculated, and I hadn't achieved my goal of getting Ethan to sign either. Frustrated, I went back inside. That night, neither Ethan nor Maya returned home. I lay on the bed, thinking about my plans to leave. Eventually, I drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. When I woke the next morning, to my surprise, Ethan was home. He handed me a steamed red bean bun, a rare smile softening his face. His tone was unusually gentle. Here, eat this while it's still warm. I had always loved red bean buns, and in the past, Ethan would often bring them for me. But ever since Maya had appeared, such thoughtful gestures had become a thing of the past. I didn't take the bun. Instead, I turned and retrieved the unsigned divorce papers from the previous night. Sign this. Once it's done, we can finalize everything. Ethan's expression shifted from disbelief to anger. Emma, I've already compromised. What more do you want? Don't push your luck. I looked at him, my face devoid of emotion. As a leader, you should keep your word and set an example. You were the one who first suggested divorce. Be decisive. Don't make me lose respect for you. Ethan was proud and stubborn. I thought my words would provoke him into signing out of sheer pride. But I underestimated him. To my shock, he grabbed the papers from my hand and ripped them into shreds in a matter of seconds, breathing heavily. He shot me a bloodshot glare before storming out of the house. I chased after him, calling his name, but I was too late. His long strides carried him to his car, and he sped away without looking back. I couldn't understand it. Ethan no longer cared for me. His heart was entirely with Maya. So why wouldn't he divorce me? In my past life, Maya had once taunted me, saying Ethan used me as a shield because of his status and reputation. Was that why he refused to let me go now? In the days that followed, Ethan didn't come home. I heard he was away on a mission. Strangely, Maya also stayed out of my sight. Without their constant drama, I finally found some peace. I spent my time at work and focused on sorting through the house. If I was going to leave and cut ties with Ethan, I wanted to sever everything cleanly. I shredded all of our photos together and threw them away. The sweaters I had painstakingly knitted and the shoes I had made for him were packed up and given away. Preparing for my move to the Northwest meant I couldn't take too many belongings. I donated more than half of my clothes to the neighbors and gave away extra blankets and bedding as well. It only took a few days to declutter, and the house was nearly emptied of my personal items. Still, Ethan didn't return. I looked at the calendar, feeling a growing sense of urgency. The day of my departure for the Northwest was approaching fast. Yet my divorce with Ethan Grant remained unresolved. While it wasn't necessary to finalize the divorce before leaving, I desperately wanted to cut all ties with him. If I was leaving, it had to be clean. No lingering connections. No reason to ever cross paths again. Just as I was brooding over this, I received a call from the military hospital. Ethan had been injured, and as his family member, I was asked to go and care for him. Despite the news, I felt no tension or worry. After all, in my previous life, I had died, and Ethan had continued living perfectly fine. I was sure that nothing too serious would happen to him in this life either. And even if it did, what did it have to do with me? I had no intention of feeling sadness or heartbreak for this man who had utterly betrayed me. When my workplace supervisor heard about Ethan's injury, he immediately granted me leave, encouraging me to head to the hospital. But instead of going there, I began inquiring about Maya Moore's whereabouts. After some effort, I learned that she was staying in Ethan's barracks at the military base, hidden away so discreetly. He truly went out of his way to protect her. I sighed, marveling at Ethan's care for Maya. No doubt he had her stay there to shield her from me, fearing I might make things difficult for her. Since he cherished her so much, I thought it only fair to leave the task of caring for Ethan to her. After all, the two of them seemed perfectly suited for each other. I went to the barracks to find Maya and informed her about Ethan's injury, telling her she should head to the hospital immediately to look after him. Once I'd passed on the message, I felt no guilt or responsibility and returned home. That evening, I cooked a hearty meal for myself and enjoyed 3 large bowls in peace. Over the following days, I busied myself shopping and preparing for my move. With the Northwest's harsh environment in mind, I made sure to stock up on necessities. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Ethan remained unconscious for 3 days and nights, showing no signs of waking. Maya stayed by his bedside, carefully wiping his face with a damp cloth. Her eyes lingered on his handsome features, filled with longing. Maya had been taken in by the Grant family at the age of 8 after losing both her parents. She had grown up alongside Ethan, falling for him the moment she saw him. With his good looks, it was no surprise that every girl adored him. But Maya's feelings for Ethan ran far deeper. She clung to him constantly, dreaming of marrying him one day. As they grew older, her intentions became so obvious that even the elders of the Grant family noticed. To avoid scandal, they hastily arranged a marriage for her, sending her off to a man she despised. Her life as a married woman was miserable, and she spent every day yearning to return to Ethan's side. When her husband passed away, she finally had the excuse she needed to come back to him. Ethan, ever the doting protector, indulged her every whim, which made her content, up to a point, but being cared for wasn't enough. Maya wanted to be the only woman in Ethan's life, standing by his side openly and proudly. The sight of his legal wife, Emma, enraged her to no end. Maya stared greedily at Ethan's unconscious face. This was the man she had loved for so many years, the man she couldn't have. The torment of her unfulfilled desire was unbearable. The most intimate moments they had ever shared were holding hands or her pretending to faint into his arms. But that wasn't enough. Maya craved more. She wanted to kiss him, to take things further. Now seemed like the perfect opportunity. With Ethan unconscious, she could finally act on her longing. Unable to resist, she leaned down, her lips inching closer to his face. Just as her lips were about to touch his skin, A loud slap echoed through the room, leaving a burning mark on her cheek. The slap left Maya more stunned, her face burning with pain. But more than the physical pain, it was fear that consumed her. Her deepest, ugliest desires for Ethan Grant had been exposed. What now? How could she explain herself? She looked at Ethan on the hospital bed, her panic mounting. Before she could gather her thoughts, another resounding slap struck her face, harder than the first. This time, the force sent her sprawling to the floor, covering her face. Shame and anger overwhelmed her as dread filled her heart. Her dark, twisted feelings were laid bare, and the weight of that realization made her unable to meet Ethan's face. She awaited his judgment, the punishment that would follow his inevitable discovery of the truth. But the judgment never came. Instead, she heard a faint voice. "Emma, don't go." Maya froze and looked up. Ethan's eyes were still closed, his face covered in sweat, and his hands flailed aimlessly. His voice was hoarse and weak as he murmured, "Emma, don't leave. The baby." Realization struck her. The slaps she had received were just the result of Ethan's unconscious movements. Relief washed over her, and her panicked heart calmed. Ethan remained in a deep stupor, his forehead drenched in sweat, calling for Emma Grant over and over again. Maya seethed as she watched him, her expression darkening. But just then, the door opened, and Ethan's guard walked in. Seeing Ethan's condition, the guard quickly pressed the call button for the doctors. They arrived moments later and began to check on him. After a thorough examination, Ethan finally opened his eyes. The first word out of his mouth was, "Emma." The doctor, standing nearby, responded immediately, "Commander, you're awake. You've been unconscious for several days. Please remain calm and rest." "Where's Emma? Where is she?" Ethan's eyes scanned the room anxiously. The guard stepped forward to answer. "Ma'am is at home." "She's at home?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "She's okay? Nothing happened to her?" "Ma'am is fine," the guard reassured him. "You can rest easy." Ethan let out a deep breath, his heart pounding as he clutched his chest. He tried to suppress the terror and chaos that filled his mind. "Tell her to come here immediately. I need to see her right away." He couldn't calm down until he saw Emma, alive and well. The nightmare he had just woken from was too vivid, too horrifying. He had dreamt of Emma, pregnant, leaping to her death from a building. He had seen her body shattered and broken, the sheer brutality of it tearing him apart. The dream felt too real, too harrowing. Even as a man who had faced countless life or death situations, Ethan was utterly shaken. He needed to see Emma to convince himself it was only a dream. Meanwhile, I was at home, humming a cheerful tune while cooking dinner in the kitchen. The guard burst in, clearly upset, and barked, "The commander is awake. He's asking for you. Go to the hospital immediately." I turned to glance at him. "Why?" "The commander has been unconscious for days, and you haven't visited him once. How heartless can you be?" The guard snapped, his face flushed with anger. "I'm not a doctor," I replied coolly. "What use would I be? He has people looking after him, doesn't he?" "But the commander specifically asked for you." "I'm busy," I said dismissively. "I haven't even eaten yet." The guard's face turned red with fury. He glared at me, his fists clenched. "Just wait. You'll regret this." Was that supposed to be a threat? I chuckled to myself. What could they do? Lock me up in confinement again for not going to the hospital? At the hospital, Ethan anxiously waited, pacing as much as his weakened state allowed. Time dragged on, and finally, the guard returned. But without me, Ethan Grant walked into the hospital room alone, his guard trailing behind. He scanned the space, his brow furrowed. "Where's Emma? Why didn't she come?" The guard hesitated before replying. "She refused. Said she was cooking dinner and didn't want to leave." Ethan's disbelief was evident. "That's impossible. Emma wouldn't just ignore me, especially if I'm injured." "Are you sure you told her clearly?" "I did," the guard said, clearly frustrated. "The moment I heard about your condition, I went straight to her. I informed her of what happened and even spoke to her supervisor to get her leave approved. But she hasn't come to the hospital. Not even once." The guard's voice grew more aggrieved. How could you marry a wife who has no concern for you? She's heartless. Ethan's expression darkened. That's impossible. There must be some mistake. He murmured to himself, his voice growing softer. Emma loves me. She's always cared deeply. Even when it's just a minor injury. Why would she suddenly not care now? What's changed? The guard, still visibly upset, offered his interpretation. She's probably mad about being locked in confinement. She made a mistake, acted irrationally, and now she's still holding a grudge against you. Can you believe she has the nerve to sulk over something that was entirely her fault? The mention of confinement jolted Ethan's memory. In his dream, he had locked Emma away and even threatened her with divorce. In the dream, she had refused to divorce him, eventually breaking down in tears and apologizing to Maya Moore. But reality was different. He vividly recalled the moment before his mission when Emma handed him divorce papers with an icy expression, urging him to sign. Her cold demeanor, devoid of any affection, and her unrelenting insistence on divorce had shaken him. In the end, he had torn up the papers and stormed out of the house. Ethan leaned against the headboard, his brows furrowed deeply. Why had Emma, who once loved him so devotedly, suddenly wanted to divorce him? Why would she even consider leaving him? Lost in thought, he didn't realize how much time had passed until a soft, simpering voice interrupted. Ethan, are you thirsty? Let me get you some water. Turning his head, Ethan saw Maya Moore standing there with a glass of water. Her face was swollen, clearly marked by a slap. He was startled. What happened to your face? Maya touched her cheek, tears welling up in her eyes. It was Emma. She hit me. Ethan's voice rose sharply. Why would she hit you? She said. She said that I'm too close to you, that we're inappropriate. I tried to explain, but she wouldn't believe me. Then she hit me. Ethan stared at Maya, his gaze unwavering. His silence made her uneasy, and guilt began to creep in. Why was he looking at her like that? Didn't he believe her? First, Ethan's anger flared. How could Emma, knowing Maya was pregnant, resort to violence? It was completely out of line. But as his initial fury subsided, fragments of his dream resurfaced. In the dream, Emma had repeatedly been accused of hurting Maya. She had denied it again and again, begging him to believe her. But he hadn't. He vividly remembered her tearful cries of injustice. I didn't push her. She's lying. Why don't you believe me? He also recalled Emma's despair as she lay pale and weak on the hospital bed, her face streaked with tears. My baby is gone. You're murderers. All of you are murderers. The final image from the dream froze in his mind. Emma's lifeless body sprawled on the ground, her clothes soaked in blood, surrounded by shards of flesh and bone. Ethan clutched his chest, overwhelmed by a searing pain that spread through his entire body. It felt as though every vein and cell was being torn apart. The vividness of the dream, coupled with Maya's presence, unsettled him deeply. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Ethan Grant knew it had only been a dream, but the terror it invoked lingered. The thought of losing Emma was unbearable. He realized with piercing clarity that he couldn't accept the events of the dream becoming reality. Maya Moore, oblivious to Ethan's turmoil, continued crying, tears streaming down her swollen cheeks. Ethan, Emma doesn't like me. I shouldn't disturb your lives anymore. Once you're better, I'll move out. This had always been Maya's ultimate weapon. Every time she said such things, Ethan would relent, shifting his anger to Emma instead. Maya was waiting for him to defend her again, just as he always had. But this time, Ethan's response came after a long pause. It's better if you move out. I'll have the guard arrange a place for you. From now on, if you need anything, speak to the guard. Don't come looking for me. It'll only upset Emma. Maya froze, her entire body stiffening as his words registered. Later, after breakfast, I was preparing to go out and continue shopping for my move to the Northwest. But before I could leave, Maya showed up at my door. She looked haggard, not as plump and glowing as she had in my previous life. It was obvious that her concern for Ethan had taken a toll on her. But what caught my attention were her swollen cheeks, puffed up like steamed buns, clear evidence that she'd been slapped. I chuckled to myself. Who would dare to lay a hand on Maya Moore? She's Ethan's precious treasure. Anyone who so much as touches her would probably be thrown into confinement. Maya stared at me venomously. Emma, are you satisfied now? I frowned at her. Speak plainly. Stop with the cryptic nonsense. People like you pretend to be silent but are actually scheming. I underestimated you. You used this step-back strategy to force Ethan into telling me to move out. You really are something. Her words startled me. What do you mean? Ethan told you to move out. How is that possible? In my previous life, no matter how much I cried, argued, or even threatened to end my life, Ethan had never agreed to let her go. And now, in this life, without me lifting a finger, he'd told her to move out? I narrowed my eyes at Maya. Her words laced with venom. She wasn't trustworthy, so I didn't take her claims at face value. Is that what you came here to say? What else? Maya sneered. You're a vile woman. But let me tell you, I won't leave easily. Ethan is mine, and no one will take him away from me. Her possessiveness made me sick to my stomach. No one is trying to take Ethan from you. If you want him, have him. I don't care. Stop pretending. Maya snapped, her eyes burning with hatred. You're just playing hard to get. Her anger was genuine. She was truly furious that her usual tricks had failed for the first time. She couldn't understand how things had spiraled out of her control. Ethan had always been obedient to her, and her methods had never let her down before. What could have changed? She thought about it, and the only conclusion she could reach was that it had something to do with me asking for a divorce. You think Ethan doesn't want you because he cares about you? You're so wrong. He's about to be promoted, and he doesn't want any trouble at a critical time. Maya's voice trembled with frustration, her words spilling out in desperation. I watched her unravel, her fury and panic bubbling over. Her ambition and longing to take my place were painfully obvious. But the more she ranted, the more it amused me. Maya, with your manipulative schemes and shameless behavior, shouldn't you have figured out by now that you're doomed to be nothing more than a shadow, never fully in the spotlight? Shouldn't you aim a little higher in life? Maya's face twisted, her anger boiling over as my words hit a nerve. I looked at Maya Moore's twisted face and smirked. How about we make a deal? I'll divorce Ethan and step aside so you can have him. In return, you find a way to get him to sign the divorce papers. Maya's eyes widened in surprise. You're serious? You're not trying to set me up? Of course. Maya took the divorce papers I handed her and left. I knew that with her manipulative ways, she would likely succeed in getting Ethan to sign. All I had to do now was wait for the results. Not long after Maya left, Ethan's guard showed up again, his face grim. You're ordered to come to the hospital to take care of the commander. This is a direct order. The guard's demeanor made it clear that refusal wasn't an option. If I resisted, things might get physical. Reluctantly, I decided to comply. There was no sense in fighting a losing battle. When I arrived at the hospital, Ethan was receiving an 4 drip. As soon as he saw me, he raised his hand, trying to grab mine. I subtly avoided his touch and asked with polite detachment, "How are you feeling? Is there any pain?" Ethan's smile faded at my distant tone. He stared at me, unblinking, his gaze searching. I stood calmly about a meter away, meeting his eyes with indifference. After a long moment of silence, Ethan motioned for the guard to leave. Once the door closed behind him, Ethan spoke slowly. I've already asked Zhang to find a place for Maya. She'll be moving out soon. I kept my expression neutral and replied with a simple, "Oh." Ethan's frustration grew at my lack of reaction. About what happened with Maya, I cut him off. If you're about to ask me to apologize, forget it. That's not happening. You already locked me in confinement for 7 days. What more do you want? Ethan, even a cornered rabbit will bite back. Don't push me. That's not it, Ethan said, his tone softening. I just want to understand what really happened. Why did you push her? I scoffed, annoyed. Why was he bringing this up again? I had explained it before, and he hadn't believed me then. After locking me up for 7 days, he was revisiting the issue? Was he trying to defend Maya yet again? Typical. I don't know why I supposedly pushed her. I replied coldly. If you're so curious, ask Maya. Whatever she says, just take it as the truth. You've already punished me for 7 days. What's next? Are you planning to throw me in jail? Is there no justice left in the world? Ethan's expression shifted, a mixture of hurt and sadness clouding his face. Emma, I'm injured right now. Is this really the attitude you want to take with me? I stared at him impassively. I'm sorry if I upset you. To avoid affecting your recovery, I think it's best if I leave. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out without looking back. Behind me, I heard Ethan coughing violently. The sound was loud enough that the guard rushed in to check on him. Seeing Ethan clutching his chest and struggling to breathe, the guard quickly brought him water, scolding me under his breath. Mrs. Grant, what is wrong with her? How can she upset you like this? Ethan didn't respond, pressing a hand to his chest as a hollow emptiness settled in his heart. Emma's cold attitude left no doubt in his mind. Something was deeply broken between them. As he lay there, Ethan tried to pinpoint when things had gone so wrong. Before Maya arrived seeking refuge, he and Emma had been happy, deeply in love. But after Maya came into their lives, everything had started to change. Emma grew restless and argumentative, constantly clashing with Maya. Ethan had rationalized it, thinking Emma was just overreacting to Maya's helpless situation as a pregnant woman with nowhere else to go. But now he wasn't so sure. Ethan Grant couldn't shake his confusion. Caring for Maya more seemed natural. She was a pregnant woman with no one else to rely on. But why was Emma behaving so unreasonably? Why would she act so cruelly as to push Maya? No, something didn't add up. Emma had always been kind and gentle, well regarded in their community. She had never clashed with anyone before Maya came into their lives. Why was it different with Maya? Could it be that the problem wasn't Emma, but Maya? Ethan's thoughts returned to the horrifying dream he had earlier. After a moment of hesitation, he instructed his guard, Zhang, to pause the arrangements for Maya's relocation. Instead of finding her a place nearby, arrange a house for her in her registered hometown, Ethan said. Zhang hesitated. Sir, her hometown is over 1,000 kilometers from here. If she's that far away, it'll be hard for you to help her when she needs something. She's an adult, Ethan replied firmly. She should be able to take care of herself. Many people manage to work and raise children on their own. So why can't she? Besides, she's still young. She'll eventually get married again. Staying here isn't a long-term solution. Maya, who had been about to enter the room, froze in her tracks when she overheard Ethan's words. She stood motionless for a moment before quietly retreating. Once she found a secluded spot, Maya stopped and leaned against the wall, her face twisted with fury and despair. Ethan's decision to make her move out had already been difficult for her to accept, but now he was planning to send her back to her hometown? After all the effort she had put into getting close to him, this would ruin everything. No, she couldn't let this happen. Ethan had already instructed his guard to proceed with the arrangements, which meant he was serious about sending her away. Maya needed to act fast. Pacing back and forth, she tried to think of a solution. Her hands tightened around the crumpled divorce papers Emma had given her. Forcing herself to calm down, she smoothed the papers out and read them again. An idea began to form in her mind, a sinister yet brilliant one. A true villain takes decisive action, Maya muttered to herself. She had made up her mind. A few hours later, Maya entered Ethan's hospital room, her expression delicate and pitiful as she approached his bedside. Ethan, she said softly, I need to talk to you. Ethan glanced at her, his tone noticeably colder than before. What is it? Maya noticed the shift in his demeanor, and a flicker of hatred crossed her heart. She didn't know what Emma had done to make Ethan change his attitude so suddenly, but it didn't matter. Maya had a plan now, and this time, Emma would lose everything. Feigning vulnerability, she continued, I've decided to leave. I think it's best if I return to my hometown. I've been a burden to you for too long. You have your own family to care for, and I shouldn't interfere. Ethan looked at her, surprised. You want to go back? To your hometown? Yes, Maya said with a small nod. I've troubled you enough, and it's time for me to take care of myself. Ethan was taken aback but relieved. He had been struggling to figure out how to break the news to Maya about sending her away, and now she was suggesting it herself. If that's what you want, I'll support you, he said. Let me know if you need anything, and I'll make the arrangements. Maya suppressed her anger as she noticed how easily Ethan accepted her decision. Her heart burned with resentment, but she maintained her facade. Actually, there's something I need your help with, Maya said, pulling out a prepared document. I'm planning to buy a small house in my hometown, but I need a guarantor. Could you sign this for me? Without hesitation, Ethan agreed. Of course. No problem. Maya quickly laid out the document, flipping to the page requiring his signature and fingerprint. Ethan gave the first page a cursory glance before signing and pressing his fingerprint. Thank you, Ethan, Maya said sweetly, gathering the papers. I'll let you rest now. I need to prepare for my departure. I'll leave in a few days. Ethan nodded, watching her leave. Her apparent understanding and maturity left him feeling slightly guilty for sending her away. Still, he was relieved the situation was resolving itself smoothly, or so he thought. Maya left the room, her face calm but her mind racing with satisfaction. She had successfully executed the first part of her plan. The next step would completely destroy Emma. You can take your time packing. Let me know if you need anything, Ethan said. Maya more obediently left the room, but as soon as she stepped out, her face darkened. Send me away? It wouldn't be that easy. Now it was her turn to act. I didn't expect Maya to move so quickly. Within just a few hours, she managed to get Ethan's signature on the divorce papers and returned them to me. Wasting no time, I brought the papers to the military district office to have them approved by the leadership. The officer in charge was surprised to see the divorce papers. Why are you divorcing? Didn't you two have a good relationship? Everyone knows about the confinement incident, but I thought things were being resolved. I simply responded, we're incompatible. The officer sighed and signed the papers, holding the officially approved divorce documents. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. As I left the office, I ran into Ethan's guard, Zhang. Zhang's face was sour, but he reluctantly greeted me. I was in too good a mood to argue, so I nodded and walked past him. But as I was about to leave, Zhang stopped me. The commander wants fish soup. He asked me to tell you. I don't have time, I replied curtly. Zhang's frustration boiled over. How can you be like this? Do you even hear yourself? The commander wants fish soup, and you just refuse. What I do isn't for you to comment on, I said coolly. If he wants fish soup, I'm sure Maya would be happy to make it. Zhang was furious. You're unreasonable. The commander has already agreed to send Maya back to her hometown, and yet you're still making trouble. Do you know how much he's been thinking about you these past few days? And you're still sulking over nothing. His words caught me off guard. Ethan was really sending Maya away? That didn't sound like the Maya I knew. Maya's leaving? She agreed to go. Yes. She said she'd leave in a few days. Are you satisfied now? Go home, make the soup, and bring it to the hospital. The commander is waiting. I didn't believe it. Maya, who had schemed so relentlessly in my previous life, wouldn't give up so easily. She had caused Ethan to distrust me, driven me into depression, killed my child, and ultimately pushed me to my death. Her feelings for Ethan were obsessive and unwavering. She wouldn't retreat without a fight. My instincts told me she had a plan. With only a few days left before my departure, I needed to stay vigilant and avoid unnecessary complications. For the next few days, I carefully avoided Maya, steering clear of any encounters. But on the night before I was set to leave, she came to find me. Loud banging on my door shattered the silence of the night. I stayed quiet, refusing to open it. The gate to the courtyard was locked, and she couldn't get in. Maya pounded on the door for hours, finally leaving in a fit of rage around 2 a.m. The next morning, as I stood by the window on the second floor, I saw her again. She was still there, her pregnant belly visible as she lingered near the gate. Maya's persistence was unsettling. I had planned to leave everything behind and let go of old grievances, but her behavior made it clear she wasn't willing to end things peacefully. If that was the case, I wouldn't back down. The pain of losing my child and my life in the past hadn't been avenged. With a cold smile, I descended the stairs. As I passed the staircase landing, I carefully placed a steel rod in a specific spot, just in case. If Maya had no ill intentions, so be it. But if she planned to frame me again, she'd face the consequences this time. Once everything was ready, I slowly unlocked the courtyard gate. The moment it opened, Maya stormed in, slamming the gate shut behind her. Her eyes blazed with venom as she glared at me. Emma, did you think locking the door would stop me? She sneered. I took a few steps back, eyeing her warily. What do you want this time? Another scheme to frame me. Maya's face twisted into a smug, triumphant smile. You can't fool me. Emma, you act so self-righteous. But you're nothing but a two-faced snake. You thought divorcing Ethan would end things? Think again. I raised my voice, demanding, Maya, I've already stepped aside and let you have Ethan. Why are you still targeting me? Her eyes burned with hatred. You disgusting, deceitful woman. She spat. What divorce? What letting me and Ethan be together? It's all just an excuse. Maya more spat, her voice trembling with rage. Your real plan is to step back to advance, isn't it? You want Ethan to send me away. That's not true. I really wanted to step aside for you too. I replied calmly. Liar, she screamed. If you truly wanted a divorce, why would you have him send me away? You know I love Ethan. You know I can't bear to leave him. Yet you're this despicable and shameless, tearing us apart. Her voice grew more venomous as she stepped closer. Let me tell you, Emma, you're done for. I won't let you get away with this. And what exactly are you planning to do? I asked, my voice steady despite the tension in the air. Maya, I'm warning you. Don't try anything stupid. Last time, you framed me for pushing you, and I was thrown into confinement. What's your next move? Maya's eyes burned with malice. I'll send you straight to hell. Emma, you brought this on yourself. If you had just stayed out of my way and stopped meddling in my relationship with Ethan, I might have let you be. But no, you dared to fight back. If you're looking for death, I'll gladly grant your wish. With a shriek, she lunged at me, her swollen belly not slowing her down in the slightest. Seeing her charge at me with such desperation, I turned and ran upstairs. Maya missed me on her first attempt but refused to stop. Her determination was frightening as she pursued me, climbing the stairs with her pregnant belly. I reached the second floor and turned to face her, standing at the top of the staircase. Stay back, I yelled. Don't come any closer. I'm warning you. Maya, don't even think about framing me again. But Maya's expression was filled with smug certainty. It's too late to beg for mercy. Emma, go to hell. She lunged for me again, reaching out to grab my arm. Just as her fingers brushed my sleeve, I kicked her stomach with all my strength. The triumphant smile on her face froze, replaced by shock and disbelief as her body stumbled backward. Time seemed to slow as she tumbled down the stairs, her expression a mixture of pain and fury. I watched her roll down the steps, landing with a sickening thud at the bottom. Her screams of agony echoed through the house. She clutched her stomach, her face pale, and looked up at me on the second floor. I smiled faintly, leaning over the railing. Silently, I mouthed 3 words, go to hell. Maya's eyes widened in horror as she looked down at her belly. The steel rod I had placed earlier was lodged through her stomach. She let out a blood-curdling scream as blood poured out, staining everything around her. Her body convulsed as she reached out with trembling hands, trying to grab something, anything, for support. But there was nothing. Her hands fell limp as her body slumped to the ground. Feigning panic, I screamed, help! Somebody help! Maya fell down the stairs. The commotion brought people rushing in. They carried Maya to the hospital in critical condition. The steel rod had punctured her belly, killing her unborn child. The injury was so severe that she suffered massive blood loss and had to have her uterus removed. After hours of surgery, Maya narrowly escaped death. But as soon as she regained consciousness, her first act was to accuse me of pushing her and killing her baby. The fallout was catastrophic. Given my previous confinement for allegedly pushing her, everyone immediately assumed I was guilty. Ethan Grant's guard, Zhang, was sent to summon me at once. I went to meet Ethan without hesitation, calm and composed. He looked furious as he glared at me. Emma, why would you do something like this? He demanded. This wasn't the first time Ethan refused to believe me when it came to Maya. In both lives, he had never stood by my side. But I wasn't angry. Instead, I looked at him coldly and asked, so, you've already judged me guilty? What's next? Are you going to force me to confess? Lock me up again? Ethan Grant, who do you think you are? Do you think the law is your personal playground? My response only made Ethan Grant angrier. What kind of attitude is that? He demanded. I'm asking you directly. Did you push her? Of course not. I replied coldly. You have no right to accuse me. You don't know, he continued, his voice rising, that I was already planning to send Maya away? She even agreed to leave. And now you've ruined everything with this. I can't believe you. Ethan truly believed I had pushed Maya more. And he was now trying to manipulate a confession out of me. Maya's situation isn't a minor issue, he pressed. This is a matter of life and death. This qualifies as intentional harm. And it won't be solved by simply putting you in confinement this time. You'd better tell me the truth so we can deal with this. I let out a cold laugh. She fell down the stairs on her own. It has nothing to do with me. Ethan, I don't need your help with anything. I know what you're really trying to do. Protect Maya. Her unborn child is gone. And now she'll never have children again. You're desperate to vent her anger. So you're looking for someone to blame. I'm the scapegoat. Right. Ethan's face darkened further at my mocking tone. But instead of exploding, he clenched his fists. Suppressing his fury, he spoke more calmly this time. It's not what you think. Just tell me the truth. Emma, did you push Maya? I gave him a sly smile. What do you think? I need to hear it from you, he said firmly. Did you do it or not? Sure. I replied lightly. Let's say I did. Ethan's expression shifted to disbelief. You really pushed her? Emma, why? Why? I repeated with a shrug. That's a great question, Ethan. I've been wondering the same thing. Why would I, of all people, go out of my way to harm Maya? I've racked my brain trying to figure it out. And you know what? She told me the reason herself. Do you want to hear it? Ethan didn't respond, but his silence told me he was listening. She said you and she are lovers. She loves you, and you love her. And I continued with a bitter smile, am just a smokescreen. Your convenient cover-up. Ridiculous. Ethan shouted, his voice cracking with anger. Ridiculous. I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Maybe not. As far as I know, you and Maya aren't related by blood. Are you? A person with no familial ties. Yet you care for her more than your own wife. Don't you think that's strange? Ethan's expression twisted, but he couldn't refute me. Ignoring his discomfort, pressed on. You trust everything Maya says, no matter how much I try to explain. You refuse to believe me. Have you ever considered that maybe, deep down, you feel guilty? You know your relationship with her is inappropriate, and you're afraid I'll expose it. So, you decided to silence me before I could make a fuss. Ethan's forehead creased, but he stammered. I haven't. Don't bother denying it. I interrupted. It's already gone this far. I know you want to avenge Maya. You want to punish me, don't you? Go ahead. I'm waiting for your move. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. Yes, Ethan. I pushed Maya. I'm the reason she lost her baby. The reason she'll never have children again. So go ahead. Arrest me if you can. Ethan's breathing grew heavier. His face contorted with rage. I could see the pain in his eyes. His overwhelming concern for Maya. But who cared for me? Who mourned my child? Who cared for the innocent woman who suffered and died in my last life? I watched his face twist between fury and helplessness. When he reached out to grab me, I quickly stepped back, putting distance between us. If you have what it takes, I said with a smirk, I'll be waiting for you to arrest me. With that, I turned on my heel and strode out of the room. Behind me, I heard a loud crash as something shattered. Ethan must have thrown something in a fit of rage. It didn't matter to me anymore. As I left Ethan Grant's hospital room, I passed by Maya Moore's room and saw her sitting upright in bed, her emotions running wild. She was flailing her arms as several police officers stood nearby, one of them jotting notes in a notepad. Maya was shouting at the top of her lungs, her voice shrill and piercing. When she noticed me standing at the doorway, she screamed, "There! That's the murderer! Emma's right there! Why aren't you arresting her? Why are you letting her go? She pushed me. There's solid evidence. Arrest her now." Don't let her get away. The officers turned to look at me. I met their gaze with a calm smile and then, under their watchful eyes, walked into the room. Maya's agitation only intensified. If she hadn't just undergone surgery and been confined to the bed, I had no doubt she would have leapt up and attacked me. I stopped in the middle of the room, facing her directly. Maya, I said evenly, you shouldn't make accusations without evidence. If you say I pushed you, where's your witness? I am the witness, Maya declared, her voice shaking with rage. If you're the witness, then I can just as easily say I didn't push you and that you're framing me. I countered calmly. What reason would I have to frame you? Why would I use my own child's life to do it? Maya snapped back, her voice trembling. That, I said coldly, is something only you know. You falsely accused me more than once. After all, but to go so far as to sacrifice your own child and even your own body. Maya, do you even realize what you've done? Maya's face froze in confusion. What? What are you talking about? I looked at her with feigned sympathy, my words as sharp as knives. I'm saying that you've brought this upon yourself. Not only did you lose your child, but you've also lost something far more important. You're no longer a complete woman. No. That's impossible. That can't be true. She stammered, her voice rising in panic. You're lying to me. You're trying to confuse me. Arrest her. She screamed at the officers. Arrest Emma. She pushed me. Killed my baby. She's a murderer. She belongs in prison. The police didn't respond immediately, their faces grim. I sighed and said, Maya, haven't you realized by now? Your accusations are baseless. You claim I pushed you, but I have witnesses who can prove otherwise. You, on the other hand, have no evidence. Maya's eyes widened in shock. What do you mean? Witnesses? I don't live alone. I explained casually. That night, I had 2 co-workers staying with me. They heard everything you said when you barged into my house, including your plan to frame me. So, Maya, your little performance is exposed. The color drained from Maya's face. The police sighed heavily. So this was a false accusation. You do realize that filing a false report is a crime, right? No. That's not true. It's not true. Maya stammered, shaking her head in disbelief. This can't be happening. This isn't real. I smirked and added, hoist with your own petard. Maya, you reap what you sow. Her eyes rolled back, and she fainted on the spot. I didn't spare her another glance. With the witnesses clearing my name and proving Maya's setup, I had nothing to worry about. Besides, I had no motive to harm her. I'd already filed for my transfer to the Northwest, finalized my divorce, and let everything go. The next day, I boarded the train heading to the Northwest. As the car pulled out of the station, I gazed out the window at the moving scenery and the warm sunlight. A genuine smile spread across my face, one born of freedom and relief. Ethan found out about my departure 2 days later. He rushed to my workplace, only for my supervisor to inform him that I'd already submitted my application for the Northwest transfer long ago. To me, Ethan was nothing more than a figure from the past, a former husband who no longer mattered. What right did Ethan Grant have to inquire about my affairs? He had no idea about the divorce, but he still questioned my supervisor. When my supervisor showed him the signed application, Ethan was stunned. Seeing his own signature on the divorce papers left him dumbfounded. He was certain he hadn't signed them. Then it hit him. The documents he had signed in the hospital when Maya Moore asked him to be her guarantor. Could that have been it? Fury and disbelief surged through him as he stormed to the hospital to confront Maya. Maya didn't deny it. It was Emma's decision, she explained nonchalantly. I just went along with it. Then, without hesitation, she clung to Ethan, saying, now that Emma's gone, it's just you and me. Let's be together properly. Ethan pushed her away with a disgusted expression. Are you insane? Yes, I am. Maya screamed. I've become like this because of you. Ethan, you have to take responsibility for me. At last, Maya revealed her true colors. She demanded Ethan marry her. If he refused, she threatened to report him to the military for misconduct. Ethan was shocked to his core. He finally saw Maya's true nature, finally understood how she had deceived him, and, most importantly, He realized how wrong he had been about me. But by then, Ethan was trapped. On one side was his promising career, and on the other was Maya, a woman he now despised to his very core. Under Maya's relentless blackmail, Ethan eventually confessed everything to his superiors. The leadership valued Ethan's abilities and wanted to protect him, so they planned to cover up the scandal. But Maya refused to let it go. She was unhinged, spreading rumors and creating chaos wherever she went. She aired every dirty detail about Ethan, tarnishing his reputation. Eventually, Ethan was discharged from the military and sent back to his hometown. I didn't hear about Ethan and Maya again until 3 years after I'd settled in the Northwest. Someone familiar with both of us had also been assigned to the Northwest and mentioned their fate in passing. "They're both dead," the person said. I froze. What? How? The story was grim. After Ethan was sent back to his hometown, Maya followed him and caused constant trouble at his family home. Ethan, unable to bear her harassment any longer, strangled her to death. Then, consumed by despair, he took his own life. I hadn't expected such an ending, but strangely, I didn't feel sadness or satisfaction. I had already let go of that part of my life. There was no reason to waste even a sliver of thought on it anymore.